Here's a little trivia question for you, my little happy meal. Without looking it up, how many non-unique Ashes of War are there in the game? I will let your brain juices flow for a moment. Well, since this is a video, I can't really hear you, but if your answer was 91 Ashes of War, then congratulations. That's correct. An enormous amount of tools for breaking your enemy's skull without consideration or mercy. Or that's what you would logically think if it wasn't for the fact that out of those 91 Ashes of War, only 10 at the most don't suck. Even without talking about PvP, we can all agree that not every Ash of War is useful in the game. One of the examples that come to mind is Spectral Lance, a slow projectile with a really awkward trajectory that does very little damage for how hard it is to land, and can only really hurt if you land a headshot with it. Not the best if you ask me. On the opposite spectrum, we have Ashes of War that are so obnoxiously cancerous that you would rather drink 5 gallons of cement and jump into the nearest ocean trench than fighting these abominations, with the most venereal of them being Stomp. I've briefly talked about Stomp in Waifu's video regarding bleed in patch 1.10, but I didn't really got too much into what makes it an absolute stomping tumour and how the community absolutely despises it. So let's take a nosedive into this poop pond and discover together why Stomp is the most badly designed Ash of War in Elden Ring. Risking repeating myself yet again, the poise changes in patch 1.10 broke the very fabric of reality, making some weapons and skills completely dominate the meta. In the case of the stinky protagonist of the story, let's begin by explaining how it exactly works and what its intended use is. Stomp is a quality Ash of War and of the many Storm-type Ashes of the game. The use of the Ash of War is rather simple. You press L2 and you stomp the ground with wind revolving around you like a tornado. When enemies get hit by the tornado, they take a tiny bit of damage and get heavily stunned, where you can follow up with an attack of your choice. The concept is extremely simple and doesn't sound too bad, until you realise that this godforsaken thing has frame 1 hyper armor. What does this mean, you ask? It means that you can react to enemy attacks with it in order to trade, secure a hit, and regain priority.
Oh no! An instant kill impact stab. Whoa!
The hyper armor on this thing is so strong that it can withstand almost anything, with the only thing being capable of breaking its stance being a colossal sword-jumping R2. And after landing it, Stomp guarantees a free hit. The lingering hitbox also makes it difficult to dodge if you time it badly, even on high latency. And before patch 1.10, you could withstand it if you had enough poise, but now, unless you get hit with it during hyper armor, it will always stun, making it much more dangerous. It may not seem like a big deal since Ashes of War like Stormcaller exist that kind of have a similar purpose, but even though Stormcaller is also extremely good, it does not have the same hyper armor as Stomp, and if you miss it, you might get poked in the balls, and that tends to really hurt.
Ouchie.
In fact, all of the Storm Ashes of War in this game are very good. You can't convince me that it's not intentional that all the Storm Ashes look really unassuming and simple, but in reality are the largest salt generators in the entire game. It's legit hilarious when some guy transcends into the manifestation of the outer god of death lasers to shoot magic from his eyes that can dissolve the order of the entire universe, only for him to get knocked flat on his ass by someone angrily stomping the ground very hard. But I digress. The point is that by having an Ash of War that works almost in any circumstance, you don't have an incentive to use the other Ashes the game has to offer. Why waste time with Horror Lux's Earthshaker when you have Stomp? Why waste time with Wild Strikes when you have Stomp? Why waste time with Stamp Sweep when you have Stomp? Why waste time with Storm Assault when you have Stomp?
Oh, fuck.
Why waste time with... Right, I think you get the point. These Ashes of War might be good in PvE, but they're terribly overshadowed by Stomp in PvP. Even though there are some Ashes of War that are extremely good and have different utilities when compared to Stomp, such as Flaming Strike, for example, the simplicity of the former will always be unmatched, and simplicity is a huge factor to take into account when choosing a tool. Let me illustrate what I mean. In this fighting game, this character right here is the best character in the game. She has some of the best moves in the game, a huge amount of tools to deal with different kind of situations. The sheer damage, pressure, and defensive and offensive maneuvers she has make her, when played correctly, almost unstoppable. This guy, on the other hand, has most of those qualities packed into only one thing: his strong punch button. Unlike Chizuru, that needs to use her complete arsenal to be top tier, Ralph only needs to do one of the 4 variations of his strong punch button to deal damage, add pressure, and do defensive maneuvers. No inputs needed, no thinking required, not much at least, only monkey strike. The strong punch variations are so good and deal so much damage that doing any of his special moves aside from the grab attack is not worth the risk. This guy is the king of fighters, equivalent of Stomp. But of course he's not invincible, he has bad matchups that can be quite tricky to deal with. But he only needs to land one punch with max mode and encounter to destroy a good chunk of your life bar.
Oh!
That's quite big.
And the chances of that happening are pretty high. And with Stomp, that's exactly what happens. One unlucky Stomp and you can say goodbye to a big chunk of your life bar. It's so incredibly easy to land and so ridiculously obnoxious that gamers in the PvP scene absolutely despise it. But like our friend Ralph in King of Fighters, despite its simplicity, it is not invincible. You didn't think I wasn't going to tell you how to deal with Tumor Stomp, didn't you? Don't worry, my lardy consort, Ranni's got you covered. The most important thing to take into account is that despite having hyper armor, Stomp does not reduce the damage of incoming attacks. That means that with the right weapons, you can win a trade against Stomp. Granted, you will lose priority, but you'll come up on top of that trade. Fast attacking weapons or spells like Carrion Slicer can accomplish this task rather easily. Another important thing to keep in mind is that if your enemy has very little health, they basically don't have an Ash of War, because you can't trade with Stomp if you have no health. It can be used as a mix-up though, but it's still risky. Depending on your weapon, enemy timing, or even latency, you might be able to land an attack into Stomp's hyper armor and roll out after it too, which would basically mean free damage. And what I consider to be the biggest counter to the Stomp, weapons with hyper armor can basically ignore the Ash of War, since Stomp cannot stun you out of hyper armor. So Unga Bunga users can rejoice, and if you're having a hard time, you can always just, have a monkey showdown. To me, the saddest thing about Stomp is the way it outshines every other Ash of War with a similar purpose out there. When you have a tool that is so much better than the rest of your tools, you will find no need to use those other tools. And this does not only happen to Stomp, because even if it didn't exist, the game would still have 90 Ashes of War, where only 10 of them would be viable. What's the point of having such a cool arsenal or skills if 89.01% of them are hot garbage? Sure, you can use whatever you find the most fun and play the game with that, but you shouldn't be at a massive disadvantage if you're a Wild Strikes flail enjoyer. But sadly, FromSoft has always struggled with balance. They left Dark Souls 3 in a terrible state, and there's no indication that they will not do the same with Elden Ring. But the silver lining in all of this to me is that since Elden Ring is not a game that you should take competitively seriously, you really should just meme around with whatever you want for fun and screw what anyone says. Let those haters stomp their way out of their mother's basement and touch some grace. And that would be the end of you want me to do what? Fine, I will do it. But I gotta say, you really disgust me sometimes.